Hello and welcome to the next video in this series. In this video we are going to do some practice with classes and get a little bit more fluent in the Java language, and in order to do so we're going to work on the code that we wrote in our functions video. If you haven't watched that video, I'll put it in the description. This is a series, so there we kind of build on each of the previous ones. So we built a bunch of functions to act as a self-checkout for us. We were specifically looking at Target, but it could be any self-checkout as well. And what we want to focus on is taking all these functions that are scattered here in this main class and then creating a class for self-checkout, and then using that class to do the same exact thing that we did with this function here. So hopefully you've taken a go at this from the previous video when we mentioned this exercise. Now I'll do this here and we can code together, and then we're going to work on another exercise as well, and hopefully that'll give you enough practice with classes to move on to the next topic. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class. You know how to do that now. I'm going to call this class self-checkout. And here we have our self-checkout class, and I'm going to start working on the self-checkout now. So the first thing you want to do when you're making a new class, you want to think about what variables, what are the things that you need to keep track of. So in my mind, the self-checkout booth needs to take care of two things. One is the tax percentage, because the tax percentage is different for every state, right? So it should be able to keep track of that, and it's not something that the user inputs. And then it also needs to have a variable to keep track of what's the back cost. Okay, so I'm going to have two variables here. I'm going to have a float for tax percentage, and I'm going to have a float for an integer for the float for the bag price. Right, so I think for now that should be sufficient for our self-checkout in this current state. Now I need to give the ability for, I also want these to be private. I do not want people to be able to change this at the booth for the time being. So I'm just going to make them private. Now I need to give an ability for the other people to be able to create a copy of the self-checkout to construct a self-checkout. So if you remember from before, we make this public because we want to give other classes access to creating copies of the self-checkout. And then if you recall, the name has to be the exact same as the name of the class. And then what variables do we want them to set whenever they create a self-checkout booth? We want them to give us what's the tax percentage, and we want them to give us the bag price. So they need to give us two variables. So one standard practice that there is in programming whenever you're actually writing these constructors or these functions to create copies is if you want them to give the same variables that you see above, you can give it the same name like this. And to make it clear that this is what the user gave us and it's different than the variables here, you'll write, if you remember from the previous lesson, we say this dot tax percentage is equal to whatever the tax percentage that they give us when they're constructing the self-checkout. And then we say this dot bag price is equal to the bag price that let's say the target employee who's setting up this self-checkout booth is setting up. All right. Okay, great. So now what should this self-checkout machine be able to do? All right, so before we write any functions, what do we want to be able to do? So we want a function, I'm going to write it in comments. We want to be able to check out. And then what do we mean by checkout? It provides us the items they want to buy. For now, we're going to limit it to 3 items. We'll learn how to do more than that a bit later. So we want them to provide us the 3 items they want to buy and the number of bags. And what we want to do is we want to give them back how much they owe us. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is how you need to think about problems that are thrown your way. So what do we need to do in order to do the total owed by the customer? So we need to know the sum of the prices of the items. And then we also need to know the tax amount. We also need to add the price of the bags. And then add on the tax amount. Okay, so we need 3 different things. So we can do each of them one by one. So let's do a function for... All right, now that we know what the input is and what the output is that we're looking at, let's write a function to do that. So let's do a public function because we want the customers to be able to access this function and do a checkout, right? Everyone can walk up to the checkout booth and scan their items and get the total price that they owe. So it's going to be a public function, and what it's going to return is a decimal number. So it's going to be a float representing how much they owe us, and then we're going to call the function checkout. And then we said the input is going to be the prices of 3 items. So we're going to say float price 1, price of item 1, float price of item 2, and float price of item 3. And then we also need the number of bags that they want. So we're going to have an integer with number of bags. All right. So now that we have the 3 inputs, let's do what we just mentioned in the line here. We need to calculate this. So let's just do that in order. So we have in float sum of, and we'll call this variable sum of all items. It's going to be the price of item 1 plus the price of item 2 plus the price of item 3, which the customer has scanned. So now we have the first item in the list. Now we need the price of the bags. So let's calculate that. So float price of bags. This will be equal to the number of bags multiplied by whatever the target employer has set for the price of bags, and we have that right here, right? So it's stored somewhere in the machine, which we are representing in this private variable here. So number of bags. If you recall in the earlier example that we did when we were learning functions, we had the customer pass in the bag cost whenever they were passing the number of bags, but that's not realistic, right? Because when you actually go to self-checkout, you don't really get to choose what the bag cost is. It's already set up from before. So now we can actually use that. So I made a mistake of repeating this. It's multiplied by bag price. So as you can see, bag price is not an input of this function. It's actually an attribute of this self-checkout class. All right, so now we have the price of bags. Now let's calculate the tax. So we're going to say float tax amount. So what we need to do here is we need to add the sum of all items plus the number of bags, and then multiply it by the tax percentage, right? And the tax percentage is something, again, tax percentage is usually by state, right? So it's not the customer giving us the tax percentage. We already have it here in our variable that we defined for our self-checkout machine. So now we have the tax amount. Now we can calculate the total owed by the customer. So what we need to return to the customer is the sum of all the items plus the price of the bags plus the tax amount, right? So whenever you go to a self-checkout machine, that's what they're doing. They're calculating the sum of all the items that you have and then adding the bag prices if your state does charge for bags, and then the also tax amount of all the things that you bought, and then they give you back the sum of all of them, and then you put your card in, and that would be it. So now let's show this in action. So we're going to remove all the code that we had from before. So we don't need any of this in the main function anymore. So let's remove this. Let's remove all of this and all of this. So now let's say Target wants to open a self-checkout booth in let's say Chicago, right? So let's create a copy of the self-checkout class that we made. So I'm going to say self-checkout, which is the name of our class. And then let's give it a name. Let's say Chicago self-checkout. And then we say, if you remember, we say new, and then we say self-checkout. This is how we create copy. And now we need to give it the two variables that are required. And let's make up a tax percentage for Chicago. Let's say 20%. And we're going to represent it by like this, 0.2f. If you recall, we put an f in front of a float. And bag prices, let's say it's 10 cents in Chicago. I forgot the f. So now you have a copy of the self-checkout, and all you need to do to actually use the checkout function is you just say, and we're going to print it on screen so we can say, we're going to say Chicago self-checkout dot, and we're going to call that function that we created, checkout. Now let's give it 3 items. So we're going to let's buy an item for $10, let's buy an item for $20, and another one for $5.99. And we want 3 bags. And I forgot the F again here. Right, so we just called our Chicago self-checkout.checkout and then gave it the 3 things that we want to buy, the prices, and the number of bags. Now if we run our application, it'll give us how much we owe the how much we owe. You can ignore anything after the second decimal place, but it says it's $44.08 is how much we owe them. So just like that, look how much cleaner it became. So remember how this class we had all these functions all lying around. Now we have everything that is related to the self-checkout function right here. And we wrote one function, and we come in here, we create that class, and then we call checkout. So one cool thing about this is, let's say Target wants to move to, they want to also create a checkout booth in New York, right? So they can just say self-checkout, and they can give this one a different name. So let's call it New York self-checkout. And again, we can create a new copy of the checkout machine that we created, and I'm calling it a machine class, whatever you want to call it. And in New York, let's say the tax percentage is higher. However, there is no cost for bags. Okay, so now you can, instead of calling the Chicago self-checkout, if someone goes to New York, they can use the New York self-checkout machine, but the name of the function is still the same, and we give it the same prices. Now, since tax is higher, this is probably going to be more expensive than $44.08. Yeah, so if you buy the same items in New York, it's going to cost you $47.68. And just this is why classes are so powerful, because you keep creating different copies of it, but you just change the attribute values, but the functionality remains the same. Everyone can still do checkouts and go through the line. All right, so let's move on to the next exercise. In this next exercise, I'm going to ask you to code another class, but instead of saying what exactly to code, I'm just going to talk to you in the language that usually you experience when you go to a job. They usually tell you what they want, like what kind of product that they want, and then you need to be able to translate that into code. So in this example, I want you to code an ATM machine. So I want to actually jump into the financial side of things just to showcase how programming is used in every aspect, and I'll try to give you a taste in different areas. So in this one, try to code an ATM, and what I want the ATM to be able to do is we want the customers to be able to deposit money into their account. We want them to be able to withdraw money if they have enough funds in their account. And then we also want them to be able to check their account balance. And what that means for us is being able to just print it on the screen. So see if you can design a class which can do all these three things. Give it a go, struggle with it a little bit, and then if you get stuck or anything, you can watch the rest of the video. All right, so hopefully you've had some luck tackling this problem. So let's go ahead. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a class called ATM, and then I'm going to go from there. So you want to think about, whenever you're designing a class, what you want to think about is what do you need, what variables do you need, what do you need to keep track of in order to be able to create the functionality that you're being asked to do. So in order for us to be able to deposit and withdraw money and see our account balance, we need to keep track of what our actual account balance is, right? So that's the first variable that comes to my mind, that I'm going to have a float because money is a decimal. And I'm going to call this account balance. Okay, so that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And for the functionality that has been proposed, I don't think we need anything else to keep track of for the time being. So whenever someone is creating a account or an ATM, we're going to just create an ATM machine, and I don't want any variables. I'm just going to set account balance whenever someone creates a copy of the ATM machine. We're just going to set everything to 0 to begin with. So now the customer is going to come and we want them to be able to deposit money. So I'm going to make another variable, and we're going to make this private. No one can hack into our system and try to change this manually. If they want to change their account balance, they need to do it through the ATM machine, through ways that we provide for them. So one of those ways is going to be that deposit function. So I'm going to write a new function called deposit, and it's not going to have any return type. And then we're going to say deposit, and the input that the customer gives us whenever they want to deposit money is how much money they want to deposit, right? So I'm going to write float deposit amount. And then what do we need to do to deposit the money? We just need to say the account balance is equal to account balance plus the deposit amount that the customer put inside the ATM machine. I just want to show you one thing. There is a way to write this so you don't have to write account balance equals account balance plus deposit amount. A shorter way of writing it is account balance plus equal deposit amount. So this line here in line 13 is exactly the same as line 12. Okay, so whichever way you like to write it, most programmers go with the one below because it's shorter. So I'm just going to go with that, so you get used to it as well. And then when another function, and what we need is we want to view our balance. So again, I'm going to make this a void because I'm going to print something. So I'm going to say, call it view, and this needs to be in lowercase. I'm going to call this function view account balance. Okay, just click there. And in order to view your account balance, you don't need to input anything as a customer, right? You just click on view account balance on an ATM machine. So all I'm going to do here, I'm going to say system.out.print. I'm going to say your account balance is, put a space, and then plus, what do we need to show them? We need to show them the account balance variable that we have here. Right, so let's test our code until now, see if our deposit function and our view account balance are working properly. Let's go into the main function. I'm going to remove the self-checkout code here. So now I'm going to create a new ATM. So I'm going to say ATM. Let's call this Chase ATM, for example. And we're going to create a new ATM. And we don't need to give it any input because in the function that we create for creating a copy, we didn't need any input. So that's why there's no input here. Now what I want to do is I want to deposit. I'm going to put dot and then call the deposit function. And I'm going to deposit $100. Now when I view my account balance, I should have $100 in my account if I wrote my code correctly. I don't need the print ln. That's why it's showing red, because I'm already printing in the function. So I'm going to say view account balance. All right, so let's run our code, see if it's working properly. Right, it looks like it's working properly. So if I deposit another $50 the next day, I should get $150 in my bank account. All right, it looks like the deposit function is working properly. Yours should be doing the same as well. Now let's do the last function that we were asked. So the withdraw function. Withdraw. And we're gonna, whenever you're withdrawing money from an ATM, you need to tell it how much you're trying to withdraw. So we're gonna write withdraw amount. Okay, so if you paid attention to the requirements, we will only allow them to withdraw that amount of money if the withdraw amount is less than whatever they have in their account balance, right? So what we're going to do is say if the withdraw amount is less than the account balance. So if we have more money, if we're not asking for more money than what we have in our account, what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to reduce that withdraw amount from our account balance. So minus equal the withdraw amount. And then otherwise, we won't do anything, right? So only if the withdraw amount is less than account balance, we will reduce the withdraw amount. Maybe otherwise we can give them an error of some sort, right? We can type something on the screen for them. We can say system.out.print. You do not have enough funds. Okay, so if the withdraw amount is less than the account balance, we just subtract that withdraw amount from the total. Otherwise, we print you do not have enough funds here. Right, so let's try that out as well. So we have an ATM. We put $150. So let's try to withdraw $30. So we deposited 150. Now we're withdrawing a 30, so it should be 120. So let's run our code. Looks like it's working. Now let's try to withdraw $1,000. So if we wrote our code properly, we should get a message here saying that you don't have enough funds. And there you go. You do not have enough funds. And then since we're saying after that we tried to view the account balance, it's saying we have 120. So just like that, you actually coded in an ATM machine, which works as intended. I hope that you found this interesting and you got a bit of practice with classes. In the next video, we want to get rid of all this manual way of testing our code where we keep adding stuff in the main and then reading down here what's written here and everything, because that can be a bit painful. And as you saw, when I wanted to change from the self-checkout code to the ATM, I had to remove everything that was related to self-checkout and put the ATM tests here. And that can be a bit of a hassle. What if we want to test both of these things and we don't want to keep running the application and reading what's written down here? So we're going to look at that and then also learn a little bit about some best code practices that you should try to keep in mind from now, so you don't have to relearn later on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.